Hello again, everyone, and welcome to this closing plenary for the day, this first day at the National Bike Summit. I hope you've all learned some great things today. I'm sure you have, and shared and engaged with others in all the other sessions. I just want to thank our speakers again for making this great, and of course to our sponsors who have made this summit really accessible for so many people. So please visit their exhibits, check out their deals, make some new friends, and I want to give a special shout out to our platinum sponsors, Cruise and SRAM, and our gold level sponsors, AARP, EcoCounter, the Federal Highway Administration, Lyft, and the Sierra Club for their generous support of this year's summit. Like all of the sessions that all the plenary sessions we're doing are in Zoom. We recommend that you join in Zoom and use the Q&A box to get your questions in. We probably have a little bit of time for some questions. So, ask your questions and we'll hope to get to them. Closed captioning is available, but of course, we're fortunate enough to have Stephen signing with us once again. I know this has been a great day of sessions. We've had a really great time together, people doing rides here in person, mobile workshops, our breakout sessions, and of course, these plenary sessions. So please keep the conversations going in the conference app, Whova, whether or not you're attending in person or if you're online. Thanks for doing that. We're excited to be able to offer this plenary focused on creating safe streets for women. We hope that you will see how designing streets that are safe for women will build communities that are safer for everyone, and to walk away understanding that street safety for women of all ages and identities goes beyond installing protected bike lanes when planning for and improving the built environment. First, it's an absolute pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker for this afternoon, the Honorable Jennifer Homendy, the chair of the National Transportation Safety Board and fellow bike rider. Chair Homendy was sworn in as the 15th chair of the NTSB in August of 2021, after being nominated by the president and unanimously confirmed by the U.S. Senate. She's the fourth woman to serve as chair since the agency was created in 1967. She's a tireless advocate for safety. Chair Homendy has spent over 2 decades supporting the critical safety mission at the NTSB, the independent federal agency that investigates crashes in all modes of transportation, determines the probable causes, the issues, and recommendations to improve safety of the transportation system in the United States and around the world. From 2004 to 2018, Chair Homendy served as the staff director of the Subcommittee on Railroads, Pipelines, and Hazardous Materials under the jurisdiction of the Committee on Transportation Infrastructure of the U.S. House of Representatives. She previously held positions with the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, the Transportation Trades Department of the AFL-CIO, and the American Iron and Steel Institute. Thank you so much for joining us here in this incredibly busy time, Chair Homendy.
Thank you so much. And I'm really excited to be here. Let's see, somehow I already have technical. Okay, I'm good. I am happy to be here. And I do appreciate the League of American Bicyclists for hosting this great event and for your advocacy on behalf of all those who bike, including me. Today's discussion on gender equity in transportation is critically important and appropriately timed for Women's History Months. And I'd never pass up a chance to talk about two of my favorite topics, which are biking and the safe system approach. In fact, the sculpture behind me is one I made from some broken old bikes that I got from my local thrift store. And I cleaned them up and painted them, and I had taken the wheels off and cleaned them up, painted them, and clamped the wheels together, which I like to think is a symbol of how we're all connected, especially when it comes to road safety. I dedicated the piece to my friend Larry Willis. Some of you may know Larry. Larry died while bicycling during the pandemic in Montgomery County, Maryland. Larry was a champion for the most vulnerable and the transportation labor movement, and we worked together for many years. Next to me is another memorial, a pair of children's shoes with dried flowers. Both of these are a daily reminder of the work ahead and a reminder that our roads aren't safe, especially for bicyclists, motorists, motorcyclists, and pedestrians. We have nothing short of a public health crisis on our roads, and it has to stop. Nearly 1,000 cyclists died on our roads in 2021, a 5% jump over the prior year. That's more than 2 cyclists dying every single day. It's also the highest number of lives lost in over 4 decades. And let me repeat that, more bicyclists died on our roads in 2021 than in any other year since 1981. By the way, we also saw a 9% increase in motorcycle deaths and a 13% jump in pedestrian deaths. It's devastating and 100% preventable. It's also unequal. Socioeconomic factors play a huge role in who gets to be safe on our roads and who doesn't. Safety disparities exist across race, ethnicity, sex, gender identity, income level, and zip code, you name it. Women make only about 30% of all US bike trips, less if we're talking about commutes, where women cyclists represent only about 1/4 to 1/3 of bike trips to work. The gender gap can be seen around the world. Women make up about 2% and 10% of all cyclists in Rio de Janeiro, 4% in Kenya, and 2% in Delhi, India. Some places do much better, and I will get to that. Now, the reasons why the gap exists are varied, and I'm sure you'll have a great discussion about that among the panelists. And I am glad that this session is called Safe Streets for Women. The reasons why the gap exists are everything from security, threat of harassment, and gender-based violence. Lack of access to bicycles, which can be due to cultural expectations or who should do it, or financial barriers. Time, women perform the most unpaid care around the world in addition to paid full-time employment. And so I want to make a pitch for how we fix it. The answer can be summed up in one word: safety. And safety starts with changing the conversation. By that, I mean we have to stop telling bicyclists to do better. We have to stop telling bicyclists not to get injured. We must let go of the idea that educating bike riders will solve the problem, and that educating motorists, or even enforcing in many places laws among motorists, that will stop the crashes from occurring. This type of thinking is too narrow. Instead, we should be talking about how the entire system is failing to protect people on our roads, all people. This means asking new questions. Are vehicles equipped with technology to prevent crashes with bicyclists? If not, why not? Are drivers traveling at speeds that would make it unlikely for a bicyclist to survive a crash? Why do we allow it? Is the infrastructure designed to prevent crashes and protect riders? If a crash does occur, how effective was the emergency response in saving lives and treating injuries? Questions like these help us zoom out. They show us that we cannot solve our road safety crisis just by telling bicyclists to wear a helmet or wear reflective clothing. One very recent example comes to mind. A few weeks ago on February 25th, Phoenix area bicyclists got together for West Valley Cycle's Saturday morning ride. That morning, the group had about 20 bicyclists. At 8 a.m., they were crossing the Cotton Lane Bridge, which has no bike lanes, when a Ford F-250 pickup truck approached from behind and collided with the right side railing. The truck then veered left, hitting the group of bicyclists and crossing both travel lanes. It came to a stop in the center of the road. Sadly, 2 bicyclists lost their life that day. One victim was a local teacher. The other worked at their family business, a bicycle shop. The other 18 riders were injured, and the truck driver was not. The NTSB is now investigating that crash. But soon after that tragedy, news outlets reported that police were considering whether sun glare played a factor in the crash. In other words, whether the cyclists were visible. They were quoted with the following message to cyclists and drivers: be mindful of what's around you on the road. That has absolutely the wrong approach, one that reflects outdated thinking. I've gone out with the Fredericksburg riding club from our local YMCA. I'm on the same sorts of roads where this occurred, where there's no bike lane. There shouldn't have to be a bike lane. We shouldn't have a situation where bicyclists and motorists can't share the roads safely. For far too long, U.S. road safety efforts have centered on educating road users about safe behaviors and enforcing them. We cannot educate and enforce our way out of this crisis, and the safety burden certainly shouldn't be placed on those most at risk. I will say the one part of education I do like is the education that the different bike clubs offer to get people to bike. Now, we absolutely do need education and enforcement, especially when it comes to impaired drivers. I'm saying it's just not the panacea we've made it out to be. If it were, we'd be at 0 today. Instead, we have to consider everything and anything that can save a life or prevent an injury. That means encouraging safe road user behavior, yes, but that's just table stakes. We also must look at the vehicles on our roads, our speed limits, our physical infrastructure, and our post-crash care. That's the safe system approach, which is on our most wanted list of transportation safety improvements. It says that 0 roadway deaths is the only acceptable number. That's not to say there won't be crashes. There will be crashes. The point is that in a truly safe system, there are a lot of layers to protect road users from injury or death when something goes wrong. How? By ensuring all parts of society share the safety responsibility and that they carry out that responsibility. That means city planners and traffic engineers, policymakers and legislators, advocates and educators, vehicle and smartphone manufacturers, insurers, the media, federal, state, and local governments, entire communities, all of us. The NTSB has long taken a systems approach to safety in all modes of transportation, which is why we have recommendations that address all aspects of traffic safety, including bicyclist safety. I think we might have somebody unmuted, but that's okay. Here's just some of the things we know will make cyclists safer, all cyclists. But when we focus on safety, I will say this, when we focus on safety, we do advance transportation equity and vice versa. There are two sides of the same coin. Earlier, I talked about places with a pronounced biking gender gap, but there are places where there isn't one. In Germany and the Netherlands, for example, women make about half of all bike trips. The difference is biking infrastructure. An Australian researcher and professor said it best: if you want to know if an urban environment supports cycling, just measure the proportion of cyclists who are female. I'll mention the difference is also about culture. We have a culture that's very focused on getting from point A to point B the fastest you can in a motor vehicle. Other cultures focus on bicycling, walking, and they invest in those things. In fact, the NTSB is a strong supporter of safe infrastructure design like separated bike lanes and safety treatments at intersections because they work. But historically, we haven't paid enough attention to the safety of our built environment in the US. That's starting to change thanks to the infrastructure law, which is making massive investments in communities around the country. In other words, now is a great time to ask your local government to consider a bike infrastructure project. Speaking of the infrastructure law, I do want to applaud the League for stepping up to help local governments get safety right. Your technical assistance will help ensure these new programs and billions of dollars do what they're meant to, which is to save lives and advance equity. Another big opportunity to move the needle on bicyclist safety lies in our vehicles. Sadly, we have a long way to go, and I have said this so many times. Since 1995, the NTSB has called for requiring collision avoidance and connected vehicle technologies on all vehicles. We also believe manufacturers should be required to make safety technologies standard, not an upgrade. We also support low or no tech vehicle safety solutions like front, side, and rear underride guards on trucks. We support something that sounds like common sense, vehicle designs that reduce injuries to people outside the vehicle, like softer hoods and bumpers, something that's been a reality in Europe since 1997, by the way. And you know what else Europe has and what they require? Intelligent speed adaptation, which for many of you, you might know that as speed limiters. Speeding contributes to about 11,000 deaths a year, which is why we desperately need to reduce speeds on our roads, especially in areas with a lot of cyclists and pedestrians. Other ways to slow drivers down include road diets and implementing policy changes. Specifically, we want local jurisdictions to have the authority to set safe speeds for their own community and be able to implement speed safety camera programs. Some places don't have the ability to do that today. We know, everyone here knows, how to save bicyclists' lives, how to get to zero for all road users. It starts with asking new questions and demanding new solutions. That means expanding the road safety conversation to include personal safety, especially for women, for children, and others. A topic I can assure you is front and center for many road users, especially those I mentioned, especially for women and children and others. And I'm speaking from experience. There's a bike route near me through a park, and I used to ride every single weekend. And one weekend I had a pretty big scare from somebody. There happened to be not a lot of pedestrians and cyclists when I went out. And I was probably 2 miles away from anybody else. And someone followed me for quite a long time. This is pretty typical for a lot of women, and it can be pretty scary. To be honest, I did not return to that location to bike until this year. It's been 2 years, which is pretty sad because I feel like it's a pretty safe area because there's less traffic and the roads are pretty wide. It's unfortunate that we have to deal with those issues, but they are a reality for many. 97% of young women have experienced sexual harassment in public. 95% of women in Glasgow feel unsafe visiting parks at night. In Ireland, more than half of women feel unsafe using public transport after dark. In Brazil, 12% of trans women have been assaulted in public restrooms. The result, women do not use public open space as freely as men, and we need solutions. Before I open it up for Q&A, I'll say this. We cannot wait any longer. Bicycles have been around for 2 centuries. We've had more than enough time as a country to figure this out. We've also had more than enough time for women to fully realize bicycles' promise. Way back in 1895, a Nebraska newspaper said that bicycles were transforming ladies into some new woman on a steed of steel, which I think is pretty funny. And bikes were touted as the key to the women's suffrage movement by Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. We shouldn't have to wait any longer. When our roads are designed and built not for speed and throughput, but for safety, when people are protected from harm, even if they make a mistake, when all road users don't feel as if they need to travel in a group to feel safe and be safe, when we get to 0 roadway deaths, not just for some people, but all people, that's when we'll know we have not just a truly safe roadway transportation system, but an equitable one. The NTSB won't give up a moment sooner. So thank you. I look forward to our discussion. Hopefully there's some time for people to ask questions. I know I said 5:25. I think I'm getting on a plane, but certainly could push it to 5:30 if there are questions.
Yeah, we have a few questions. Yeah, thanks for offering that. And thanks for your time. First one is, in 2019, the NTSB recommended that NHTSA incorporate into the new car assessment program tests to evaluate cars' ability to avoid crashes with bicycles. NHTSA most recently said that it would happen sometime after 2025. What needs to change so that the US will lead on vehicle safety testing?
Political will. I mean, Bill, I don't mean to be, I am very direct.
No,
Like
be direct. No, okay, yeah. And
you have a whole bunch of people who are clapping right now, I'm sure, but it's true.
It's true.
You know,
Yeah.
I see some of it right now. I don't see the action we should be seeing at NHTSA. I'm not seeing the safety improvements. I'm not seeing the regulatory mandates and commitments that were made. I'm hearing 2024, 2025, which hopefully not, but we all know could be in another administration, which then could push it even further. The fact is, when it comes to the new car assessment, we're on board for changes. The safety community is on board for changes. The vehicle manufacturers are on board for changes. This is an easy win. So just get it done. Sorry, I'm very passionate.
No, and we are glad, and I'm hearing that the crowd is erupting, and in person. In this weird format makes it hard for you to feel that, but I think I just want to tell you that we behind what you just said. I think you as somebody. I don't know, any advice on building political will, being more direct? How are we more effective? We're a national organization made up of thousands and thousands of local advocates. Any advice there on helping build that political will?
Well, you guys do a great job, I have to tell you, whether it's, with local communities or when you do an event with, members of Congress, or the DOT goes and, rides around DC, those are good opportunities, but I really, it's your persistence, your voice. Everybody, and I have to be careful here. There's an anti-lobbying appropriation rider, education. All right, I use my bully pulpit to speak, passionately about safety, and I am not afraid to do what I need to do to say what has to be done. And I know that was a lot there, but frankly, I'm not afraid to call out inaction, and I do it regularly to try to push, but we have to. I think, media can be really helpful with that. I mean, we're seeing that with some of the issues now, where we had a number of near collisions in airplanes, and a number of derailments, and I think about those, and I mentioned to members of Congress throughout that we have all this focus on these two modes, which is great, but what's happening every day when somebody is dying, right? 107 people are dying on our nation's roads a day. And so where's the focus there? Like, why not the outrage? And maybe we just have to keep it in everybody's face in the press and put a face to the tragedy. Yeah.
No, thanks. Yeah. So, I mean, clearly we need culture change, right?
Oh, yes. And I was in Helsinki, and it was so different in June. Oh, I loved it. I mean, cars actually stopped when I tried to cross the street. Then 2 weeks later, I was in Florida, and it was like I couldn't even cross the street, even though I had the right of way according to the sign.
Yeah. No, I think we all have been there with you. And
yeah, we get yelled at.
Absolutely. I mean, are there examples that you see in your work that could help us apply to the challenge that we see, like in that sort of that culture change, the lack of safety for people biking? I mean, in particular, women in particular, like, is there anything, story or an example or something from your work that, that we could draw on?
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to think about that
Yeah.
one,
And that's a hard one.
it
Okay,
is
we
a
talk.
hard one. One thing I will say that I love though, is when the bike clubs do different events.
Uh-huh.
And if I go out with a bike club, I always feel a little safe because it's a group of people, even though we've investigated crashes, including one with a whole group. But again, you shouldn't have to be with a group to feel safe though. But I do like what they do.
Yeah, no, I think we think a big part of helping people feel safe is to ride in a group, and then let's build a bigger movement through the joy of riding bikes. I know you feel it, we know what it's like, and so we really appreciate your help in saying what you say and riding the ride and doing what you say. I mean, riding the ride, I guess that's the best way to say it. Incrementalism, I think that maybe one final question. I know you got to go. Many safety offices stress incremental progress on things that are good. How do we push back a little bit without being like doom and gloom, like doomers? Like, how do we push back a little bit? I think on that incremental progress.
On pushing back on incremental
How do we push back on there's progress happening, but how do we push back without being doom and gloom? Exactly. Yeah.
I think providing some success stories. I mean, I see a question here about how can the US not be compared to the Netherlands all the time, because it is very different. It's a different culture. We as a nation, we have to make some hard choices. What do we want for our future? Do we want one where there's cars? Because if you build another lane, they're going to, have more cars. We're now, and I appreciate, the focus on the environment and clean air, but we're going towards significantly heavier vehicles. What are we doing? We're going in the wrong way. It shouldn't be quality, air quality or safety. It should be both. And other nations have made that commitment. There are great places that we could point to around the US that have had successes, but we have to make hard choices and we have to invest in those. And I know that didn't answer your question.
No, it did. I mean, I think that I think it did. We have to give credit where credit is due on real progress, I believe. I think, and I think you've pointed that out, but we also have to be bold and say the truth, right? And you did it, and and have inspired us, and will continue to inspire us. Thank you for being here and doing what you do. And we're really happy that we're riding together with you and towards all the things you've just described so beautifully about what we need to do. So thank you for your time. I know you got to run.
No, thank you for having me, and I'd love to come back.
We'll have you.
Someone mentioned at the end of the chat, we're often preaching to the choir. Trust me, I talk to everybody outside of biking and walking. In fact, every single time I talk to other modes of transportation, like pipeline operators, I talk to airlines, I'm always talking about the importance of safety for their employees that are on the road, because they never bring it up. It's always like, oh, we have our safety of our flight crews. Well, a lot of your employees bike to work. Or maybe you should provide more incentives for them to bike to work, so I talk all to everyone about that when I get out and about, because we do have to make sure that we're getting past our own communities and talking to others. Anyway,
absolutely.
Hope we come back.
Oh yeah, well yeah, let's do it. Thank you so much. We'd love to have you back again and make this a regular thing. Thank you so much for being here and for all the work you're doing.
Thank you. You too.
So next, I'm excited to introduce another friend and partner back to the National Bike Summit to moderate this excellent new plenary panel. Shin-pei Tsay is the director of global policy for cities and transportation at Uber. Her experience converges at the intersection of design, policy, and governance to transform the built environment with a focus on sustainable and inclusive transportation. Prior to joining Uber, she founded Make Public, a social impact analysis firm that specializes in the public realm, and was also executive director of the Gale Institute, a nonprofit that advocated for public life and public spaces. Shin-pei has also served as Deputy Executive Director at Transit Center and Director of Cities and Transportation Program under the Energy and Climate Program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and was Deputy Director of our great friends, the Transportation Alternatives in New York City. Shin-pei was a commissioner for the New York City Public Design Commission and taught urban design at Columbia University and the Parsons School of Design. I hope you all give a warm welcome to Shin-pei and let her introduce our panelists.
Thank you so much, Bill. It's so great to be here and be a part of the National Bike Summit. Have great memories of experiences going in the past, and it's great to be a part of it today. Just to build on that amazing plenary, and it was so fabulous to hear the enthusiasm and passion for this topic, road safety for women. I have an incredible panel, and because we don't have a lot of time, I'm just going to introduce them very, very briefly and then let them kick it off. What we want to leave with you today is a better understanding of the ways that the experience of women with road safety, what stands in the way, and then a call to action as to what you can do about the issue yourself in your various roles. We have a panel of researchers, practitioners, and advocates, and I'll just give a quick introduction. Tara Goddard is an assistant professor at urban planning at Texas A&M University and an expert in pedestrian and bicycle safety. She was the former bicycle pedestrian program coordinator for the city of Davis in California, and is the vice chair of the Transportation Research Board Standing Committee on Women and Gender in Transportation. Tanisha Sepulveda is an architectural associate with BCRA in Tacoma and is a program co-coordinator for the BIPOC Mobility Action Committee, BMAC. As a power wheelchair user since 2010, Tanisha recognizes the lack of accessibility in the built environment and advocates for equitable access to transit housing with a focus on sidewalk repair and maintenance. And last but not least, Tomika Monterville is currently the director for the City of San Antonio Department of Transportation, but she has had numerous leadership positions at transit agencies across the US, including the Link system in Central Florida, WMATA, and FTA. She has contributed to the BRT system in Washington and was executive director of the H Street Main Street. And I think more importantly, she had some real nice things to share about her personally, which I want to end with. She likes to be introduced with a hype song, and today's song would be Mary J. Blige's The One. And she loves all things transportation and does not like co-signing the crazy. So I just want to leave you with that. I'm going to ask Tara to kick us off with an overview of what she thinks some of the state of play here in women and gender issues.
Yeah, thanks everyone for having us. I'm really excited, and that was a great kickoff by Chair Homendy. She touched on a lot of the background issues, so I'll keep this pretty brief. But I just wanted to set the tone and give a little background to kick off the next speakers. So looking at women and gender issues in transportation, it might seem obvious to people, but it's important to say that there's different challenges than men in transportation needs, barriers, and safety concerns. And also, I just want to be clear that many of the issues faced by women, including trans women, are also experienced by femme, non-binary, and/or gender non-conforming individuals. And then importantly, as you'll be hearing more about in the talks, intersectional identities in groups like race and income may even be more visible or important or impactful for women than men, and that all comes into play into this. So this is a study I always like to quote from 2010 on why some road safety problems are more difficult to solve than others, where Elvik documented 5 persistent road safety issues by all motorized countries. And even though pedestrian, bicyclist, motorcyclist safety is one of those, as well as the literal impacts of large vehicles, gender differences was not on his list. And part of that is because it does vary by countries and context. And these well-documented disparities, these have been studied by transportation professionals for at least half a century. So a lot of it is not new. The first women's travel issues conferences were hosted by TRB first in 78 and 96. It became the Women's Issues in Transportation conference. There have been subsequent conferences. I highly recommend going and looking at a lot of the great work that's come out of those. I just like to say our committee, we changed the name recently because we felt that women's issues, even calling it that, kind of makes it seem like just something that women should care about, right? And even that term issues felt diminishing. So that's why we changed the committee title to Women and Gender in Transportation. And I put a link there to our centennial paper, which I think also does a nice job. And so I think you'll have access to the slides later. So then, through all this amazing study that we've been doing for a long time, we know that these are some of the biggest barriers in bicycling as a viable option, right? And Chair Homendy touched on a lot of these. So personal safety and security, traffic safety, women often report greater sensitivity, or at least admit it maybe, to risks from drivers. Then things like gender roles, gender norms, labor roles, which I think is, we've really seen COVID has revealed some of the importance of labor roles and where people are vulnerable or exposed to traffic dangers, bike access and knowledge, and things like data issues. So gender not just being like a checkbox or something that you can see, but really understanding every part of the process. And then just to set up the numbers, again, since we're mostly focusing on safety here, there's a recent study that did a really good job looking at a bunch of different data sources, 17 countries and 6 continents. And like Chair Homendy alluded to, it largely has to do with infrastructure, right? So in countries where the cycling mode share is greater than 7%, the gender split is pretty equal and sometimes more women. And that's why you'll sometimes hear women referred to as the indicator species or the canary in the coal mine of safety, right? But where cycling mode share is lower, you see more commuting, less other trips. Older people are less likely to bicycle, and then children and probably their caretakers are less likely to bicycle. So that's kind of the overview of what's going on. And now that we're kind of on the same page of what's the scope, what are some of the known barriers, we can talk about, well, what are some of the exciting programs or advocacy efforts going on to change this really persistent disparity?
Great, thank you, Tara. To follow up on that, Tanisha, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the barriers and challenges to achieving a truly safe environment for women, but not beyond women, right? We're talking about safety across everyone's experience.
Yes, thank you. Hello, everyone, and thank you for having me here. My name is Tanisha Sepulveda, and as far as that question goes, is the barriers and challenges to achieving a truly safe environment. And as it was mentioned, it's not just for women. I'm a woman, but I'm also a power wheelchair user. And so as far as it comes to building for women and towards accessibility, I think should be definitely top priorities. Some of the greatest challenges that I have found, honestly, as Chair Homendy said, it comes back down to politics and policies that are being funded, and the fact that there needs to be more data using the gender mainstreaming, which involves, well, it was a term defined by the Council of Europe as the improvement, development, and evaluations of policy processes, incorporating at all levels and stages the perspectives of all who would be involved. And actually, it says the actor is normally involved in policy making. And to that, I would say that we need to either advance or evolve or change those normal actors in policy making to look more like the community that they're serving, because as we know, it is greatly white male dominated. And I would probably say middle class, upper middle class, white male dominated. And the areas that are most underserved are areas of color, areas of poverty, areas that have been redlined in the past. I live in one of those areas because not only are there greater chances of need for accessible transport, but a lot of people live in with disabilities live in areas that are more underserved because they tend to have the cheaper rent. And we tend to need that because we are not given the opportunities to education and the workforce as much, primarily because lack of transportation that is accessible to those places. And so definitely data collection, active involvement, and this is not only just from women, but women with women in mind, because there are women who can also be men bias as far as to the implications, just as we've been conditioned. So people who have that mind frame to really develop and design infrastructure that is safe for every member of the community. And in order for that to happen, we need more funding with the right perspective as far as serving these communities of women and people with disabilities and children. Because if we build our environments to serve the most oppressed community, then all will benefit. Everybody can walk up a ramp. Everybody benefits from street lighting. Everybody will feel safer letting their kids out to play. So yeah, I think those are the main barriers as far as needing more data that is gender perspective, mainstream in mind, more involvement from people who have experiences, women, people with disabilities, minorities, other religions, sexual orientations, just getting that all well-rounded perspective, because everybody is affected differently, and making sure that we have that funding, pardon me, in order to put those policies in place.
I love it.
Thank you.
Sounds like the first steps to building the political will that Chair Homendy was talking about was that engagement. And maybe one of the ways that all of us could make that more possible is to even just offer transportation to some of those community meetings that we need to show up at. But Tomika, I was, building on that, I was hoping you could tell us a little bit more, given your broad experience in practice, some of the immediate opportunities from an agency perspective that intersect with advocates and so that we can better center women and marginalized communities in the experience of safety.
Thank you. Thank you to the summit. Thank you, Shin-pei. And it's wonderful just to be here on the panel with Tanisha and Dr. Tara. Thank you so much for all of your great research. I think one of the ways in which we can operationalize everything that we've talked about here today and what the chair spoke about is to really make it simple and plain. When we look at the infrastructure and this marriage of all of us, from research to advocacy to practitioner, the marriage occurs when we're all speaking the same language and we are understanding that language, and not from a heavy jargon place of all the technical terms that we use as planners and engineers to convey information, but making it plain and helping people to use the same language. So normalizing the language that we use around safety, around what it means to be safe. And I always say in my work, if you plan for the least, you serve the most. So if we are planning for those who are least privileged in our communities and ensuring that the people who have the least have a sidewalk, that means someone like me who sits in a seat of privilege, I'm going to be okay, because if we've taken care of the needs of someone who has different abilities, whether it's cognitive, whether it's physical, whatever it is, then we're addressing that need. So we know statistically women are here and men are here in a lot of our areas of the world and how we navigate the world. But if we want to bring women up, we need to think about women in the context of your mother, your sister, your cousin, Because I guarantee you, if a male engineer had a mama who was trying to get to a store who didn't have a vehicle, they would make sure, or they would definitely make it known that there's a problem with their mother, sister, cousin, other getting to someplace. And so in my work, what I try to do is educate my peers in terms of the practical. So we know advocates, you need to be armed with information. And as a practitioner, I need to share the information with you. So when you go to your elected officials, and we talked about political will, you have the language to articulate and convey specifically what you need. And what we need in the construction of safe facilities, whether it's lighting, whether it's a sidewalk, whether it's a shared use path or a bike path, is we need our construction contracts to have more than just square footage of asphalt and concrete, but to actually have those design elements that make us safe. So if you know your city is about to do a major construction award or a solicitation for a construction company to build infrastructure, make sure that you're talking to your local elected officials, your department directors, your public works directors, about the types of infrastructure you want. If you want separated panels for that separated bike lane, you need to have that in that construction contract, because often we're looking at 20th century standards of bike infrastructure, and we're using the same 20th century standards that Federal Highway or TRB spoke about in 1989. We're using those for construction contracts in 2023. That's problematic. So the first thing you need to ask for as an advocate is, let me see the bid tab. And that is the tabulation of all of the elements in the infrastructure space that local construction firm will be bidding on to provide for your street repavement, for your new sidewalk, for your lighting, for your utilities. And just this past week, several of our council members here requested what is called a council request for all of our utilities to be underground. So when we look at our public works and our transportation departments, look at how we actually implement the infrastructure. What things are missing in the conversation. So if we want these beautiful places, like the chairwoman spoke about Helsinki, you want these types of facilities, do we actually have the directive in our contracts to make sure that the firms who are awarded this work actually can produce it? So that's one thing in the day-to-day operations and how things are built. And then when we also look at data, let the data drive our decision-making. One of the things we're working on here in San Antonio is collecting data about cyclists, about pedestrians, but that takes technology. So if we know that we have an opportunity to collect the data, but we're more concerned with the levels of service of an automobile, and levels of service is a methodology by which our state departments of transportation, our departments of transportation and public works agencies determine whether or not that road is operating optimally. So an A is good, traffic is flowing, and F is traffic is bad. But you know what? We need some F streets, because if we slow the streets down, that makes it safer for pedestrians and cyclists, right? But we don't need all streets to be operating at that level. So we need to work with our local elected officials to identify which streets make sense for us to prioritize cyclists and prioritize transit and prioritize pedestrian activity. So when we work together and identify, every street is not made for bikes, just like every street is not made for cars. But we need to be bold. We need to be deliberate in saying, let's have a conversation about which streets make sense to prioritize the throughput of people and having a dedicated and exclusive transit lane, and which corridors in our cities do we want to make specifically for safety of pedestrians and to give them the space to move, so that the fatalities that the chairwoman spoke about don't happen, because we've actually designed a city or an area and a community that is focused on how we can keep people safe. And if we serve women who have babies, who raise families, who marry partners and build villages and communities and jobs, if you serve that woman, you're serving the world at the end of the day, because we know we are the ones who are moving and creating. And so we need to be a part of the conversation when we create those documents, those policies that really create the safety that we want for our roadways that accommodate all users.
Thank you, Tomika. I actually want to open it up to the other panelists on this last point. I mean, you gave us a lot of practical examples of where advocates can be a part of the process and prioritize and even call out specific additions to street design that would improve safety. I wonder if Tanisha and Tara, if you have other ideas from your perspectives that could help shift the conversation or center gender in the way that we look at road safety.
I'll jump in, sure.
Yeah.
So I think, we can get in front of our policymakers and our decision makers with all the stats in the world, and everyone who knows me knows I love my statistics and data. But I really think that getting decision makers out into the field, into the world to experience the systems that they're in charge of can be some of the biggest steps forward, like Chair Homendy was saying, and like Tomika was saying, with like, where do you get that political will? Like, where do you actually get those bold things so that you can implement what Tomika was talking about, these important, like, actual implementation? Well, you need the decision makers passing the local ordinances or, implementing the things that are already on the books. And so I think that's somewhere where advocates and practitioners can really do a lot together. And when you're like a mid-level person or lower, it's really, really hard. And so, you may have all the greatest plans and you may buy into this and be ready to go, but you need the people above you to be supportive. And so I think, those, and it doesn't have to be fact-finding missions to Helsinki, as much as like that would be amazing to all be part of, but even getting into your own community, because nothing will radicalize you faster than actually just trying to get around those ways. And so that's something that I think, we should be looking in every individual thing to go to our, our decision makers and say, have you used the system? Like, are you out in it? Like, get out there. And especially if you're someone who is able-bodied, you're a man, maybe you don't travel with kids very often, teaming up with local groups. And I know Tanisha can speak to this a lot more, teaming up with local groups to go out there in the field together so that you can really hear what their experiences are like, or, begin to understand. You'll never really understand their lived experience, but at least being out there in the field together, you can start getting that viewpoint that if you're just moving around that space by yourself in your privileged way, you might never you just don't even know what you don't know, right?
Yes, that's great. What about you, Tanisha?
Thank you so much, and thank you for that beautiful introduction into what I'm about to say, Tara. So definitely, as Tomika was saying, as Tara was saying, like, one of the biggest things I can't push enough is making it personal. Like, understanding that it could be your mother, brother, sister, father, yourself. I was injured and became disabled. So that's possible for anybody. And so here in Washington State, we are pushing and trying to make it national, the Week Without Driving, where we, bring it, exactly like Tara said, to policymakers and ask them to take a week without driving, to experience what it's like to use transit, the transit that they're making the policies for, to get out there, experience the sidewalk, experience the bus stop, experience, transit access. And last year was definitely, it helps enlighten people. There was a policymaker who wanted to participate, but his wife happened to have a lot of hospital appointments that week, or not even hospital, but doctor appointments, which can be located all over. And he wasn't able to participate because there simply were not routes to these medical facilities. And he was dumbfounded, what if we didn't have a car? How would we make it here? How would we be served? How would we get help? And that is the real life every day for so many people and non-drivers across the community. So really just bringing it to the legislators and asking them, hey, take this week without driving. It is in the fall last year. It'll be in the fall again this year. And we'll definitely be putting out more information about that. But to really experience what it's like to be in the shoes, wheels, walkers, stroller pushers of the people who need transit to get to places where they need to go, for the opportunities and experiences that should be a right for them. So, yeah.
That's such a great idea. Actually, you can see what can happen too when there is political will. So personally, there were a lot of great examples that Chair Homendy shared, right, in terms of cultural and they're frankly political differences in those other countries. And from my professional experience, our team in Australia recently launched a One Less Car campaign, if you can believe it. And they are giving a transportation budget to people, to households to give up their car and just to see what it would take. And this is because there is political will around like the opposite direction, meaning like, how can we do better in helping people give up a car? And so we're studying the effects of that transportation budget. So I just think that this is such a great discussion about all the different ways that you can lean in and not to forget your audience, right? Like not to be aware of the context and who you need to persuade, where you need to build that, the political capital to make it happen. To that end, I actually thought we could go into maybe some of the questions in the chat. But what, obviously we're talking about a lot of different, this is the National Bike Summit, it's US focused, and we often bring up examples from other countries where they so-called do it better. But inclusion in those places is also very complicated. It is not straightforward. It is not necessarily inclusive in the way that we might think it is. And I'm curious to hear from everyone if there are ways that we could consider cultural responses or ways to either transfer some of those lessons or to do things differently in terms of resetting that narrative.
I'll start by saying, I think one of the ways in which we reset the narrative is you really have to do, as Tanisha said, when you place people in other people's shoes and you have that experience. One of the things that I had an opportunity working with Gallaudet University in Washington, D.C., I became a better planner when I was exposed to people with different abilities and how they navigated the area around the university and how they got to the train station or how they got down to 8th Street. And that's often something that we have to do, is just to look in our own communities and in looking at those other places. But if we look in our own communities and identify where is the low-hanging fruit in terms of just a conversation, because I have found in almost 30 years doing work in transportation, many people are just not aware of what the experience is of someone who is not in their circle, because we all do things within our circle and our influence. And so you have to take yourself out of that. But the places where you're seeing that happen and seeing changes in bicycle safety for women are those cities that I believe are young in their transportation development. So we have a paradigm shift that's happened probably in the past 25 years, whereby former public works agencies or departments have been broken up or a new transportation department has been created. But where I see really good examples of what we're seeing in Europe happening here in the past 5 to 7 years, I would say the Durham, Charlotte, Raleigh area in North Carolina, I believe that there's a coalescing of political will, of community engagement, and also of infrastructure funding. And I believe in cities where you have seen a new influx of funding specific to mobility, you start to see whole systems and a network of safe infrastructure for women, for cycling, for walking, and those with different abilities to be able to use mobility devices in spaces that they haven't used before. It's when we look at our older cities that may be grid cities who are, we could be 200 years old, but the reality is we love that aesthetic and we love that experience and that hearkening back to days of yore, that we don't feel like making them accessible is a priority over maintaining that aesthetic. But I think we do have cities here in the US that are moving the needle. And we are in a place, I believe, that we can look at many cities like Denver who are making a commitment, and that's the political will. And I think if other cities model those cities in moving the needle, then we can make it a better place for women to cycle no matter where they are, but using those cities as models.
Tomika, you just set up one of the questions was, can we get all politicians to not drive for a week? Could this go beyond the state of Washington? What do people think?
We
Tanisha,
can
you
do
see any spread of this idea?
Go ahead, Tomika.
We can do it. I think if you do it and you make it such a national, like you got to shame people into doing the right thing sometimes. You got to shame them. So, there's always this intercity, competitiveness. And I think if you shame a city in a state and you say, oh, we did this or this city did that, then other cities, naturally, the leadership are saying, well, they're not going to one up us. So I think it can happen, Shin-pei. I think that's what we have to do. And then we have to stop co-signing the crazy. Like, you don't need to have an unprotected bike lane on a road where the speed is 35 miles per hour or higher. Come on, you're going to die. All the data, Dr. T has told us all this data for decades. We've known this. So stop co-signing the crazy, shame us into submission, and we'll be good.
I know. I think sometimes it's not new data we need. We just need to strategically apply the stuff we know. I don't know if Tanisha and Tara, if you have anything you want to add there about the spread of some of these campaign ideas, and hope the league is listening closely.
I'll jump in. I definitely second Tomika there on shaming people into. Everybody loves a good healthy competition. You know what I mean? Like, we are being compared to the Netherlands, to Germany, to the Danish. Like, it's if they can do it, there's no reason why we can't. And that is just more of a keynote into the fact that implementing during planning is going to be way cheaper than having to reconstruct afterwards. And people don't want to do that, and people don't want to put the money there. And just like Tomika was saying, even in old, beautiful buildings that obviously weren't built to be accessible, there's a way to design and integrate accessibility beautifully. We've seen it. It's all over. It's possible. But definitely being able to get lawmakers and policymakers, I don't think that's impossible. I think it's very possible. And people just need to be willing, and definitely like making it personal and being like, do this, where there has to be a family member. There has to be someone elder who has mobility issues, or perhaps a niece or nephew or a best friend. Like, it can happen.
Tara, from your experience as a bicycle coordinator, what do you think about the viability of something like that?
Yeah, I think, I saw when I was working in Davis, and at that time Bikes Belong, or even before that was People for Bikes, they would take leaders, and these folks would come back and they would just, their eyes totally open to different things. So I think it's, and this idea of shaming, and also just the inner city, if it's cities or even the state DOTs or whatever, there's competitive things, or it matters, they care, right, about the kind of marketing of these. So I think it's a good way to get people into it. The key piece then becomes, really looking to, I think, community organizing and teaming up, like Tomika mentioned, with these, and Tanisha both, existing organizations who've been doing this work on the ground, who, maybe as a bike advocate, you didn't necessarily see yourself before or even think about as a partner, but you have a lot of the same goals. How do you use those existing, networks and movements and community organizing to then not only get the leaders to participate, but then take that excitement and momentum and keep holding on the pressure to actually get change, whether it's zoning and code changes or the really important budgeting things that Tomika is mentioning. How do you really get it? Because those politicians will get really excited, and maybe they, like it's personal and they're radicalized, but then they leave. And so you need to make sure that those structures are in place so that even when they're gone, these processes keep happening, and you've really built on that.
That's great. And so we're coming to the end of our session. There's one last question, and we're going to do a lightning round that's going to answer another question in the chat. For each of you, this work on advocacy, but also specifically, or maybe more broadly, it's advocacy to build more inclusion, to address equity, and to expand the definition of accessibility as we think about gender as the center. of it, what are some of your kind of go-to resources online, social media or YouTube, or who inspires you to keep going, as Tara's saying, that's so necessary for us to keep on fighting the good fight? Maybe Tara, or, I don't know, anyone can jump in, put you on the spot.
Sure, yeah. Well, I'll just say, first of all, that I wanted to say that I think a really important part of this piece, bringing it back to women and gender, is even though we've known about a lot of these issues for a long time, the shift away from, we're really still under the legacy of vehicular cycling, a very able-bodied, white male-centric approach. And it's really been in the last few years where I've really seen that shift happen. And it really requires men, white men of power in particular, to also do the work and be calling that out and fighting against it, whether it's e-bikes or cheating things you see, or arguments against, bike share inclusive bikes or whatever. And so I think that's going to be a piece of it. And in order to understand those conversations and see some of those tools, I think that's where you have to broaden where you're getting your resources. So those of you who may know I'm active on Twitter. And so I think Twitter's potentially, it can be a great place for that.
We should follow you on Twitter. That's
yeah.
Okay,
yeah. But what I was going to say is generally, check who you're following, check what bubble, like the bubbles and silos you're in, like Tomika mentioned, and just go out and look. Like the Week Without Driving is a great place to start and find a lot of people, whether it's disability advocates or people of color who are in the space or whatever, and kind of use those to just check what's the makeup of the people where you're getting your information. I can share on Twitter if people want to do, but you don't have to follow me, but you can find me on Twitter at Dr. Tara Goddard. I can share some of my accounts and resources and things that I follow, but I think,
yes,
looking for the hashtags and then branching it out.
Tamika, what's your one source for inspiration?
So for inspiration is always music, but for the purposes of this, I love the Transportation Research Board. There's so many articles, so many case studies, so many reports on different modes. And I think the Federal Highway Administration, it may not have the most recent reports on certain data things because it just takes so long to get a lot of the research done. But they do have a lot of links at the Federal Highway Administration's website, just at USDOT's website, and the proven safety countermeasures, all those types of resources that the feds offer are really great tools. And then if you just look on YouTube and you type in bicycle, like the Google machine and YouTube, child, those are the hits keep coming. But in terms of actual research, Transportation Research Board. TRB. Yes, TRB has any and everything under the sun. All those items that Dr. T shared with us earlier, it's just a well of knowledge, and it's going to be a great resource for you. You get that foundational data. Perfect,
Tomika. And Tanisha, let's have you wrap us up.
Yeah, honestly, a great inspiration for me personally would be a woman. Her name is Anna Zibart. And
Yay,
she is
Anna, yes.
Shout out to Anna. Big shout out, because she is the director of Disability Mobility Initiative and created the white paper for transit mobility across, or rather the obstacles to transit mobility across Washington State. And so I do believe that also, focusing on accessibility as far as creating accessible paths and making it safer for people with disabilities and mobility issues definitely also benefits women as a whole, because there's a lot of overlapping benefits there. And so I would say, as far as resources, you can check out Disability Mobility Initiative on YouTube. It has some of those Week Without Driving videos, compilations of different legislators talking about their experience. Also, you can check out the white paper research done by Anna that explains a ton of different obstacles people with mobility issues experience every day. And also being the co-coordinator for BMAC, also known as BIPOC Mobility Action Coalition. We are a group of BIPOC and underserved disabled people who are working towards transit justice and equity, as well as environmental justice and housing equity. And so we're really going to help try to lead and push Week Without Driving nationally this year. So be on the lookout for us. We're getting our socials set up. We're just a new organization starting out, but we're really trying to hopefully make this big, and would love as much participation as possible.
Thank you, Tanisha. Thank you to this amazing panel. Thank you for this conversation. It was so great to be a part of it. I have one last comment here. Quit co-signing crazy, the quote of the day from Tomika. Yeah, let's give her a round for that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you all.
This
Thank
was
you.
fun.
Thank you all so much. Incredible. So yeah, my inspiration, this panel, this plenary has been awesome. Thank you all for a great discussion, for your leadership, for being willing to share your knowledge and perspectives with all of us. Absolutely, we can do it. Also, absolutely, I'll say that e-bikes are not cheating. So I'm just going to say that. I just rode one from where the National Union over the league office to do this plenary, and they're just fun. But I think we're all much better prepared to really look at our communities and really stop co-signing me the crazy. Thank you for that quote of the day, to build the support, to build empathy and the political will to create safe streets for women right now. So thank you all so much. So a couple more things before we let you go. Part of creating safe streets through the safe system approach is safe vehicles. This week, the League Policy Director, Ken McLeod, sat down with Maria Ray, who's the Director of Public Affairs at Cruise, to discuss increasing safety on our streets with autonomous vehicles. We'll take you to that discussion right now.
Hi, I'm Ken McLeod, Policy Director for the League of American Bicyclists, and today I'm sitting down with Maria Ray, Director of Public Affairs for Cruise. The League is excited to have Cruise as a platinum sponsor of this year's National Bike Summit and their endorsement of our 6 guidelines for safe autonomous vehicle cyclist interactions. Maria, can you tell me a little bit about Cruise and the problems that autonomous vehicles solve?
Yes, thank you, Ken. It's so great to be here for your conference. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person, but I'm excited to connect with everyone in this way and have colleagues from my team on the ground there in DC to meet with you all. Thanks again for the invitation. Cruise is a self-driving car company based in San Francisco. We have operations in multiple cities, including San Francisco, Austin, and Phoenix. And we have a vision for a new transportation future, one where we're able to drive more safely, more sustainably, and more accessibly with autonomous vehicles at the helm.
The League published 6 guidelines for safer autonomous vehicle cyclist interactions in 2021. We're really proud that Waymo and now Cruise have endorsed them. With those 2 companies, every company in the United States offering paid rides and automated vehicles to the public endorses the League guidelines. What made Cruise interested in our guidelines, and why is the safety of people biking important to a car company?
We're so proud at Cruise to support the essential work that the League does every day, advocating, providing educational programming, and working with the bicyclist communities across the country. And we're so proud to endorse the principles because those are guiding how AVs should be programmed and deployed to support safe interactions between AVs and cyclists. We're not just endorsing these principles as ideas. I feel like that sets us apart from some of the other companies that have endorsed the principles. We actually already incorporate all 6 of those principles into our AV technology and our systems. That's by having a unique category or a unique categorization for cyclists. It also includes a wide range of cyclist scenarios in the simulations we run every single day. Those are inspired by real world scenarios that our cameras map and sense. And we're excited to be able to demonstrate some of those through the blog that was just released that actually shares some of our visualization. That's our unique visualization software. And we're really excited to share that with your audience to be able to see how we see the world and how we see cyclists.
And one of my favorite parts about working with Cruise is hearing about your embrace of slower speeds for safety. One of our guidelines is slowing down when there's uncertainty or potential conflict. And I think many people, when they think of the future, they think of, rockets and ever faster vehicles. But why is it sometimes better to be slower for the future of transportation?
We all know that 100 people are killed every single day in a traffic-related collision. That is an unacceptable status quo of transportation today. And it happens for so many reasons. And that includes many factors related to humans that are operating the vehicles on the road. What makes our AVs unique is they are programmed to obey all traffic laws, and that includes driving within the speed limit. And so unlike human drivers, our cars are never going to drive drowsy, drunk, or distracted. And we envision a future in which the entire transportation ecosystem, whether it's cyclists, pedestrians, personal vehicle drivers, or transit users, can all benefit from AVs being on the roads.
Awesome. In the video that will be shown after this Q&A, you show a lot of cyclists who work at Cruise and talk about the importance of designing for cyclist safety. Why do you think it's important to also partner with outside advocacy groups for people who bike and not just work with the people at the organization?
Yeah, we try to do this with so many facets of our work. We want to work with the communities and with the organizations early on that represent important constituencies to make sure that we are improving the status quo and taking their experiences and unique expertise into account. We do that with disability rights groups, including the National Federation for the Blind, the American Council for the Blind, and United Spinal. And that's because we're driving or developing accessibility features that we need to work with those folks with lived experience to ensure that we are creating the most accessible riding experience for them. And so we apply that same methodology to working with organizations like the League to both inform our technology and inform our operations. And it's really essential at Cruise for us to have a safe operating system. Safety is essential for us to be successful. And we know that we can't just win the technology race. We have to gain the trust of our customers and our communities, and that comes with engaging with them. We really believe that our AVs can make a difference, and we feel like partnering with the League and other organizations gives us the opportunity to learn, build upon your history of advocacy, and hear from members and partners about what you hope to see.
Maria, thank you so much for joining me today. The League of American Bicyclists is so proud to have Cruise as a platinum sponsor of the National Bike Summit this year, and we're excited to work with you in the coming year and months and future to make sure that our roadways are safer for everyone out there biking. Thank you so much for joining me, and really excited to show everyone how the Cruise automated vehicle incorporates cyclist safety in this great video.
Thank you, Ken. Thanks to your whole team.
Thanks.
Gonna try that again, folks. Hold on.
My fears about riding in the city definitely revolve around safety.
I do not commute to work on my bike. The city is a very congested place with very narrow streets, and as a cyclist, I worry about having enough space.
I'm afraid of people walking out, or dogs, or kids, cars not seeing me.
Having been hit by a car, I learned that even if cars and bikes have the best intentions, accidents are still going to happen.
At Cruise, I look at trends to identify improvement areas to make our cars safer. We want to ensure that the AVs drive very smooth like a human driver, but we need the AV to perform with superhuman performance. So a while back, our AV was acting a bit unnatural when approaching cyclists. The AV would follow closely behind. They didn't want to nudge over to cross double yellow lines. But that behavior could make a cyclist feel uncomfortable if they have an AV traveling slowly behind it.
So once an area has been identified that we want to work on as a team, we're responsible for implementing that behavior in the car in a safe and comfortable way. We want our car to be predictable to other road users. The difficult part that we're tackling is, well, what if someone is irrational, or what if someone does do something a little different than what they normally would do? When making room for a cyclist in a lane, when the AV approaches the cyclist, it's thinking about the worst case scenario. So what if this cyclist swerves left? By making more room, that optimizes for safety essentially, and then we can pass the cyclist safely.
So after a developer has checked in code and it comes to our testing, we create a scenario that will specifically target that code change. We run our simulations like a video game. We can create the route that we wanted the car to take in the city. We could put in bicycles and pedestrians. We run hundreds of thousands of simulations every day across multiple platforms. There's a suite of over 10,000 simulation tests to specifically target the AV's interactions with bikes.
Our goal is to be able to have this autonomous vehicle driving among humans in a very natural way where no one's giving them extra space or really worried about them. If this autonomous vehicle just is like another car on the road, another hyper vigilant car that can see 360 degrees, very long range, is constantly monitoring for cyclists and pedestrians and other cars on the road. So recently there's a cyclist approaching our autonomous vehicle from behind, coming quite fast, and our autonomous vehicle actually shifted over a little bit in the lane to give this cyclist room, which most humans probably wouldn't do unless they were like hyper aware of their surroundings and wanting to be as courteous as possible on the road. That gives me comfort as a cyclist, I guess, that this is going to be our future.
Oh, hello, I don't know what happened there. What's happening?
I'm taking mom on her first driverless ride tonight.
It's with you, my mom. She's
Sorry, everyone. Clearly, I need to go back to production school, but yeah. So anyway, thanks so much to Cruise once again. It's really impressive technology, and we are looking forward to more people being safe due to the leadership. So, our movement, this last part for tonight, is really an exciting time at every National Bike Summit. Our movement is filled with amazing people, and it's very inspiring and a life-giving part of this job to recognize them in their work, making bicycling better for everyone. We're really excited to share with you the winners of the 2023 Advocacy and Education Awards. Thank you to everyone who nominated these great leaders. Now you'll see a snapshot of them as we close out this session. And as in previous years, we're going to host one-on-one in-depth interviews with each one of them, bike-side chats during National Bike Month in May. So please stay tuned for that. And now join me in congratulating these awesome winners today.